I would like to segue because you've written about Ukraine, you've written about Israel, but to segue between the two, with the wargaming in the report, you do talk about parallels between Ukraine and China and Taiwan. Can you talk about what those parallels are and what are not paralleled?
There are a few important parallels. Yet I think the big one is bad things happen. Before the invasion of Ukraine, most commentators, myself included, just couldn't believe that a country in the 21st century would invade a neighboring country and then try to conquer it. But in fact, that's what the Russians did. Some years ago, I wrote a report on what I called coping with surprise. And one of the points I made was that bad things happen, unexpected things happen. Countries will weigh military decisions in a way that we think are unwise or misplaced, but they will do that anyway. Maybe their assumptions about military capability are different from ours. Maybe their assumptions about changing military balance is different from ours, and they feel that they have to move now. But for whatever reason, surprises, attacks happen. Of course, one of the classic examples there is Japan attacking the United States in 1941. The United States had done its analysis and thought that this was be a very foolish thing for the Japanese to do. Uh, and we were right, but they did it anyway. And the Japanese had done the same analysis. They weren't under a lot of illusions about their ability to defeat the United States. They intended to strike the United States hard enough that we got discouraged, but they recognized the risks also, but decided that the risks were worthwhile given the squeeze that was being put on the Japanese economy. So if I had to pick a one major insight that comes out of Ukraine is bad things happen. And if the Chinese were to invade Taiwan tomorrow, no one would get up and say, "Wow, didn't see that coming." No, everybody would say, "Oh yeah, we've been
Right.
expecting that for a long time." So it's important then to be ready for that kind of situation. A couple of other things come out of the war in Ukraine, and it's important to note one big difference is the war in Ukraine is primarily a ground war, whereas a conflict with China over Taiwan would be mostly air and naval. And that has actually been quite beneficial because it means that much of the aid that we have sent to Ukraine would either not be useful or not be as critical in a conflict in the Western Pacific. So there's some trade off there, but not as much as might otherwise be the case. One thing that does come out uh, looking at the war in Ukraine is first the need for adaptation. That is, unexpected things happen. And you have to be ready to adapt when your expectations are not met. Both sides are doing that. Uh, I think before the war, if you had asked people, what do you think the role of trench lines, fortifications, and unguided artillery will be in the next war, many Washington experts would say those are irrelevant. Modern warfare is long range, precision strikes, small units operating autonomously. And of course, what we've seen is entirely the opposite. It looks like World War I with some 21st century weapons. And both sides have adapted to that. And that doesn't mean that new capabilities are not important. Of course, anti-tank weapons like Javelin and NLOS have been very important, and drones have been hugely important as ISR and as ways to direct artillery. Another surprise has been the strength of air defenses. We're not sure how that will affect a conflict in the Western Pacific, but certainly over Ukraine, the air defenses on both sides have been so great it's difficult for aircraft to fly over the territory of the other side. In fact, you almost never see that anymore. Aircraft either just go right over the front lines, drop their ordnance and scoot, or they fire longer range munitions to stay out of air defense envelopes. So you're seeing air defenses have a real impact on manned aircraft. One thing that's been very interesting is on the naval side, the Ukrainians have defeated the Russian Navy, driven them to the corners of the Black Sea without any of the attributes of a navy. They don't have any ships, and they don't have any naval aircraft. They've been able to do that with long-range precision strike, both anti-ship missiles, and that's what sank the Moskva, uh, land attack missiles, which have attacked Russian ships at the pier, and then unmanned surface vessels that have tracked down and hunted Russian ships in their anchorages. So non-traditional capabilities at sea have been unexpectedly effective. How that affects a conflict in the Western Pacific, people are going to be thinking about for many years, but it's been a very striking aspect of the conflict. And finally, for air attack, the use of long-range drones, cruise missiles, but the kind of kamikaze drones that Iran has supplied to Russia have supplanted strikes by manned aircraft. We don't know if that's going to be the case in the Western Pacific, but it's very striking that the air war is very active. Attacks against deep targets and cities are integral part of the conflict, but it's not being done in the way that has been done in the past.
It is interesting to see how things have been shaping up, in particular, if we just with current times and the Houthis, Red Sea, what off the shelf technology, Ukraine off the shelf technology. You see these farms where they're 3D printing drones, and just how these non traditional means that have popped up, how they're impacting the battle space. And I can only imagine that, we what would transpire if we actually went into a conflict.
Of course, the drones are a striking aspect of the conflict in Ukraine, and both sides, everyone is thinking about how that would affect conflicts elsewhere, for example, in the Western Pacific. Now, the situation there is different in the sense that it's air and naval. Most of the drones that are used in Ukraine are these small, cheap, expendable drones that are used either for ISR or have some small ordnance on them and used against personnel targets or vehicles. We have not seen much use of the large drones like Predators, Reapers that were so important in the Middle East wars. How that translates to the Western Pacific, again, is a little uncertain. Our timeline, which was 2026, didn't allow for many of those capabilities to be fielded. For example, the Navy is looking at a lot of unmanned surface vessels, underwater vessels. Those might start to be fielded operationally by 2026. They're doing a lot of experimentation now. Air Force is running a lot of experiments with what they call loyal wingmen. Again, it's not quite, those are experiments, but you can see that those capabilities are on the verge of being fielded and making a major difference. And if there were a conflict, then you would see these capabilities pushed into the conflict as we've seen it in Ukraine, where we would be willing to experiment, take losses, and pay the cost of putting immature technologies out into the field if we thought that it would have a immediate effect during a conflict where you're struggling to get any military advantage.